Caleb Thorne wasn't an archaeologist or a treasure hunter, but a young geologist obsessed with verifying myths. He believed every piece of folklore had a demonstrable geological foundation. His fixation was the Obsidian Labyrinth, an allegedly endless cave system beneath the remote Black Ridge Mountains, said to be untouched by sunlight. After months of fruitless searching, on a cold, early autumn morning, Caleb finally located a hidden fissure the locals called Needle's Eye. It was a passage impossibly narrow, requiring the greatest risk to traverse. Despite the ominous stillness and a primal urge to retreat, the thirst for discovery won. Caleb secured his heavy pack, clipped his weighty silver-plated geological compass firmly to his belt as a talisman, and squeezed into the darkness, leaving the light of the living world behind. The crawl through Needle's Eye was a half-hour journey in cramped, jagged space. Caleb had to remove his pack, shove it ahead, and twist his body to unnatural angles. The rock ground against his ribs, and the smell of damp earth and methane filled his lungs. Beneath it was something else, something acrid like rusted iron and scorched soil. Time stretched impossibly. The sunlight behind him faded to a pinprick, then vanished entirely, leaving him in absolute blackness. It felt less like crawling underground and more like sliding down the gullet of some colossal beast. When the rock walls finally opened up, Caleb dropped onto a cold stone floor with a heavy thud that echoed once, then was completely swallowed by the air. This was the strangest thing. Every cave system had reverberation, had drafts, had the sound of dripping water. Here, there was nothing. Only a silence so profound it was suffocating. The air was thick and bone-numbingly cold, creating an unnatural stillness that devoured all sound. Caleb flicked on his headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a massive chamber, perhaps 50 feet high and wider than a basketball court. The floor was not typical limestone, but slick, jet-black rock, almost like volcanic glass, yet with the texture of shale compressed over millions of years. It absorbed light like a sponge. In the beam of his light, he discovered 5 colossal objects resting on the damp rock floor. They were 5 heavy ironwood coffins, aged almost to the point of petrification, yet sealed completely with gleaming black bitumen and arranged in a bizarre star pattern. These didn't look like abandoned graves. They had been meticulously prepared, as if they were time capsules guarded against entropy. Above the central coffin, a symbol was deeply etched into the stone, the image of a serpent coiled around a pierced heart, an unmistakable marker of ancient, malignant ritual. Curiosity overrode caution. Caleb had found geological evidence of a forgotten cult. He used a crowbar to pry open the central sarcophagus. A pungent odor of tar, resin, and dried flesh rushed out. Inside lay a man in 18th-century ceremonial dress, his face skeletal but unnaturally preserved, the skin taut like tanned leather. The very moment Caleb raised his camera to document this historical finding, a dry, grating hiss erupted from the 4 corners of the chamber. The 4 remaining coffins simultaneously flew open, their hinges shrieking in agony. The family, 2 adults and 2 children, also seemingly perfectly preserved, rapidly sprang to life. They didn't speak, but emitted a powerful vibrational frequency, a low-frequency hum that pierced Caleb's protective earplugs and paralyzed his will. The father, with pitch-black eyes devoid of whites, fixed his gaze upon Caleb and mumbled in an archaic, incomprehensible language, yet the cold voice carried a clear meaning. Warm meat, scent of the sun. Caleb abandoned his camera, his flashlight, anything that might slow him down. He fled in terror, only catching the mother's sharp shriek, as if her skin were tearing as she acclimated to the air. The most horrifying thing wasn't their speed, but their method of movement. The Thorne cannibal family didn't pursue by running like normal humans. They moved by gliding in the dark, their bodies shifting subtly like mist, almost weightless. But this movement generated a chilling scrape, skitter as their long, pointed fingernails clawed and dragged across the limestone floor. They used their talons to push and pull themselves across the rock, creating a deathly symphony of metal and stone. Caleb was driven into an adjacent tunnel system, a labyrinthine tangle of smaller caves and crevices. In his panic, his headlamp swept over what he assumed were boulders, but which turned out to be hundreds of desiccated remains. They weren't common white skeletons. They were utterly drained, scattered in postures of sheer horror, as if life had been squeezed out of them. Some still wore 19th-century military uniforms. Others were in work clothes from the early 20th century. Nearby were modern polyester sleeping bags, and even a high-end hiking boot he recognized, perhaps belonging to an unlucky explorer just a few years prior. He realized this wasn't a burial site or an ancient temple. This was their hunting system, a network they had used to herd and hunt prey for centuries, whenever they awoke from long hibernations. This terrible truth made Caleb understand he was dealing with long-term predators, creatures needing only minimal energy to sustain their unnatural existence. And they considered him the first prey of this new era. The horrifying slither behind him nearly swallowed Caleb whole. He ran blindly, his body screaming from lack of oxygen and sheer desperation. He stumbled, pitching forward, and unexpectedly fell through a strange geological fissure. He stared in disbelief as sunlight poured through this crack. The light was powerful, almost divine, forming a blinding column that pierced through layers of thick rock. This was the Sunwell, a natural ventilation shaft of Black Ridge, where the final afternoon light struggled to penetrate. The Thorne cannibal family halted right at the threshold of the light. Their skin began to lightly smoke and hiss in agony as they attempted to cross the dazzling circle of light. Caleb understood. Sunlight didn't kill them instantly, but it caused intense pain. This was his only sanctuary. But the sunset had begun to dim the shaft, warning him that his time of protection was quickly ending. With every passing minute, the safe circle narrowed. As the column of light faded, the Thorne father, driven by insatiable hunger, glided to the edge of the circle. His claws stretched out, millimeters from Caleb's ankle. Desperate, Caleb ripped out the flare gun he carried for signaling, firing it into the rock wall. But it was only useless noise and a weak red glow. In the moment of confrontation, Caleb instinctively used the heavy silver-plated geological compass he always wore to push the creature back. The compass struck his hand. The silver metal contacted his skin and instantly charred, creating a deep black burn and a terrible sulphurous stench. The Thorne father recoiled with a searing shriek of intense pain, as if burned by acid. Caleb gasped. He had found the weapon. The silver-plated compass, weighing almost a pound, suddenly became priceless. He used the silver compass as a shield and a makeshift weapon. He fought, scrambling backward through the narrow exit of Needle's Eye, repelling them with silver, just as the very last rays of sun completely vanished from the valley, and the darkness became their perfect ally. Caleb scrambled out of Needle's Eye, his body scraped raw and his mind shattered by horrific memories. He collapsed onto the damp earth, struggling to breathe the fresh air, yet the cold sensation and the smell of bitumen still haunted his nostrils. The wound wasn't just skin deep. It was a profound psychological trauma. The silver compass, now stained with black blood and scorch marks, rested in his trembling hand. He quickly reported the event to local authorities, but their reaction was outright skepticism. A young geologist, known for his rationality, telling tales of an embalmed cannibalistic vampire family beneath Black Ridge. The local sheriff merely shook his head, assuming he was in shock, oxygen-deprived, and perhaps in need of psychiatric care. They sealed Needle's Eye with a temporary metal barrier, treating it as a simple precaution against an unstable cave, not to keep a horror contained. Caleb knew that relying solely on geological evidence or personal testimony would land him in a padded cell or ruin his career. He needed confirmation from another source, one who understood the language of darkness and legend. He sought out the most powerful clergyman in the town, Father Silas, a man known not only for his faith but for his deep knowledge of local lore, the stories the church had tried to bury for centuries. Father Silas lived in a worn-out parish house, surrounded by dusty books and silence. As Caleb recounted his story, stumbling, disjointed, but filled with terrible detail, Father Silas listened silently, his sharp, gray eyes unmoving. When Caleb meticulously described the serpent coiled around the pierced heart on the stone slab, then detailed the claw-mark scar on the mother's wrist that he had glimpsed as she arose, Father Silas went pale. He expressed no false surprise or skepticism, only pure, terrified affirmation, as if a bad prophecy had been confirmed. They have awakened. The Thorne cannibal family. Father Silas explained that the Thornes weren't vampires in the romantic sense. They were 18th-century settlers who had entered a dark covenant to survive harsh winters and plagues, a pact that transformed them into predatory creatures, hibernating in the dark and requiring warm meat to sustain their unnatural longevity. The serpent and heart symbol was a sign of sacrifice and flesh. The claw mark was the sign of their blood allegiance to the underground cult. They didn't die. They waited. Over the next few days, Father Silas acted with frightening efficiency. Using his deep influence with major mining companies and local government officials, he launched an information campaign declaring that Black Ridge was suffering from severe geological instability and an unavoidable risk of collapse. Thunderous explosions echoed for 2 days, not natural earthquakes, but controlled detonations designed to cause selective collapse. On the 3rd day, Caleb saw the news spread across local radio and papers. Black Ridge shuddered. Geological fissures cause collapse of unstable and dangerous cave system. Area declared unsafe and permanently sealed. All entrances capped with concrete and access forbidden. Caleb understood that Father Silas had used leverage to engineer a geological counterstrike, a controlled collapse, burying the Obsidian Labyrinth completely. The Thorne family was retrapped. He felt no victory, only a cold burden. He left town immediately, leaving no trace, carrying his haunting and his sole evidence, the blood-stained silver compass. It was no longer a geological instrument, but a protective charm, a reminder that he had sealed an ancient horror beneath the earth. He had not destroyed them. He had only put them into forced hibernation, waiting for another curious geologist or another earthquake to open the door. Caleb Thorne returned to the civilized world, but his soul remained perpetually trapped within the Black Stone Labyrinth. The Black Ridge incident had annihilated his promising career in geology. The tale of walking corpses preserved in tar and repelled only by a silver-plated compass earned him the reputation of a paranoid madman, a failed hero suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The university severed all ties, and colleagues who once admired him now regarded him with pity mixed with fear. Caleb confined himself to a small apartment, the walls lined with geological maps, ancient texts, and rare books on theology and alchemy. The silver compass, his only tangible evidence and inseparable companion, was guarded carefully within a glass case. The dry bloodstain on its argent surface had become the emblem of the truth denied. His obsession was no longer validating the legend, but understanding the science behind the horror. Why did silver burn them? How had they sustained life for centuries in suspended animation? His research quickly shifted from petrology to lesser-known traditions concerning elemental and metaphysical materials. He discovered that silver, argentum, in many ancient cultures was not merely a precious metal, but a conductor of pure, vital energy, the absolute antithesis of the absorbing, stagnant nature of bitumen and obsidian. Bitumen, the material the Thorne family used to seal their coffins, he realized, was a reverse preservative. It didn't just maintain the body. It held the spiritual energy and the rage intact, preventing the soul's natural decomposition. The Thornes had not died. They were merely waiting. He understood that the Thorne Eaters weren't vampires in the traditional sense. They were biomagical aberrations, bound by a profound geological curse. They represented the horrific intersection of dark matter, bitumen, obsidian, and cursed vitality. 2 years passed in strained silence. Caleb took on tedious programming work to fund his research, struggling to maintain the veneer of normalcy. he still monitored geological reports with terrifying focus. On a damp February evening, while reviewing microseismic data from the Black Ridge region, Caleb detected an anomaly. Although Needles I remained silent following the collapse orchestrated by Father Silas, hundreds of miles to the south, a series of inexplicable microtremors began to emerge. These weren't the signs of normal tectonic faults. They were small, cyclical energy bursts moving in an almost perfect linear path southward toward a dense, ancient port city named Port Azmar. A cold sweat broke out across Caleb's brow. He realized that the cavern system beneath Black Ridge was deeper and far more extensive than they had imagined. The Thornes hadn't been trapped. They were tunneling. Using his advanced geological models, he mapped their trajectory. They were traversing weaker sedimentary strata, leveraging ancient fault lines and subterranean water flows. The further south they went, the deeper they drove. Their journey wasn't random. They were being led by purpose. Caleb began comparing the geological markers with local news reports. Port Azmar had recently reported a significant spike in unexplained disappearances, primarily of homeless individuals and undocumented tourists. Initially, the police blamed a rising human trafficking ring. But Caleb read a small article about an unusual sinkhole that had opened in a derelict warehouse district, forming a deep pit that smelled of tar and burnt meat. There was no longer any doubt. The Thornes had broken free. They had traveled a long distance underground, and now they had reached their destination, a densely populated area with a plentiful supply of warm meat, and more importantly, a location tied to their cursed history. Caleb knew that presenting these seismic findings to any authority would land him directly in a psychiatric ward. He needed different proof, a historical explanation to predict their next move. He visited the Port Azmar University Library, home to the region's largest archive of maritime and colonial history. He focused his research on the earliest settling families and the secret cult practices at Black Ridge. Finally, he located a sealed manuscript written by a Jesuit priest in 1803, only decades after the burial of the man in the coffin. The document was titled The Subterraneans. The Jesuit described a wealthy merchant family, the Thornes, who had amassed their fortune by trading in dark ritualistic artifacts and striking ghastly bargains with ancient entities. The family patriarch, Elias Thorne, believed the key to eternal life lay not in gold, but in the renunciation of light and the sustained preservation of life through the pure matter of death, obsidian and bitumen. The document revealed that Port Azmar wasn't a random destination. The city was the site of the Black Stone Tabernacle, the Thorne family's secret place of worship and the location where they were to conduct their final ritual of complete transformation. Crucially, however, the text referred to the second heart of the city, an ancient crypt containing the body of Phoebe Thorne, Elias's stillborn daughter, whom he believed was the perfect sacrificial vessel. This crypt was constructed deep underground, nearly touching the city's ancient water mains. If they find Phoebe, Father had written, they will complete the ritual. They will achieve the second state of perpetuity, no longer bound by any matter save the silver soul itself. They will no longer be eaters, but haunts. Caleb understood. The Thornes were seeking a crucial artifact, Phoebe's corpse, to finalize their transformation and eliminate the last vestiges of their weakness, their sensitivity to silver. And they were using Port Azmar's subterranean network of old crypts and abandoned tunnels beneath the Black Stone Tabernacle as their new labyrinth. Caleb rushed from the library. He knew he was running out of time. Port Azmar, a modern city of 500,000 residents, was becoming the new hunting ground for these creatures. The sewer system, the abandoned subways, and the foundations of the ancient buildings formed a perfect artificial black stone labyrinth, a sprawling network of shadow. Caleb decided against alerting the police. He had learned his bitter lesson at Black Ridge. This time, he would handle it himself. He found a surplus store and bought a heavy coat, then hit the pawnshops and antique dealers. He spent all his savings buying anything made of solid silver, outdated photo frames, dented cutlery sets, even a compact mirror plated in pure silver. He carefully melted them down and cast crude darts and arrowheads. He reinforced his silver compass onto a thick leather piece for easy gripping, turning it into a small shield. He equipped himself with a sewer diving suit, radio communication gear, and most importantly, a detailed map of Port Azmar's drainage pipes and abandoned tunnels. He was a geologist again, but now he was a demon-hunting geophysicist. His first access point was the old warehouse district where the sinkhole had appeared. The darkness in Port Azmar wasn't silent like at Black Ridge. It was filled with the hiss of drains, the hum of electricity, and the distant echo of the city above. As Caleb slid into the sinkhole, the stench of bitumen, saline blood, and old stone washed over him. Immediately, his flashlight illuminated a familiar mark etched into the rock wall, the coiled serpent around a pierced heart, the symbol of the Thorne rite. They were here. Caleb tightened his grip on the silver compass. He knew that beneath this city were not just caves, but bricked-in tunnels, narrower structures with more exits. But that also meant if they were here, they could be hiding anywhere. The labyrinth of black stone had come to his world, and this time, the sunlight could not save him. He had to find and destroy their second heart before they could find their own. He pushed deeper into the blackness, leaving the dim electric lights of the city behind, descending straight into the cold earth, following the trace of the dry, clicking sounds that grew ever closer. The transition from earth to man-made structure was jarring. The tunnels here were claustrophobic, the air thick with sewage gas and the mineral smell of centuries-old mortar. He moved like a ghost, his geological training serving him well as he navigated the forgotten routes beneath the oldest part of the city. He checked his map constantly, correlating the tunnel network with his seismic data. The microtremors suggested they were moving along the old municipal water mains. Phoebe's crypt had to be nearby. He rounded a corner and stopped dead, the beam of his light finding a fresh scene of horror. It was a kill site, far more gruesome than anything at Black Ridge. On the grime-coated floor lay several empty articles of clothing, torn and soaked in a dark, slick substance, not quite blood, but the concentrated essence of the bodies the thorns had consumed. The air was colder here, drawn by some unnatural draft deeper in the earth, and the stench of burnt flesh was overpowering. Suddenly, a dry, rasping sound scraped against the brickwork ahead. It was a sound Caleb recognized from his nightmares. The eater's movements, a mechanical scrape, the friction of their tar-coated skin against the stone. Caleb dropped to a defensive crouch, drawing one of his crude silver darts. The beam of his light settled upon a figure emerging from a side conduit, a female eater, her facial features obscured by dried bitumen, her movements jerky and unnaturally swift. She was smaller than the ones he'd faced before, perhaps a lesser member of the family, a scout. The moment she registered Caleb's presence, she launched forward, a silent burst of speed. Caleb didn't hesitate. Focusing on the center of her mass, he threw the silver dart. It struck the creature just below the sternum, penetrating the thin layer of embalming matter. The reaction was immediate and shocking. Where the silver made contact, the black bitumen ignited. Not with fire, but with a fierce, brilliant blue-white light, like an arc welder shorting out in water. The creature halted, letting out a horrific sound, a long, gurgling hiss that seemed to originate from pressurized lungs that should have been dust centuries ago. It collapsed, the blue light dissolving the dark preservation matter and allowing the long-stifled spirit to finally dissipate. The body crumbled into dust and flakes of tar within seconds. Caleb staggered back, coughing. The silver worked. The raw, pure argentum was anathema to the dark energy that sustained them. But the confrontation had been too loud, too visible. He had announced his presence in their new home. He pressed on, adrenaline masking his fatigue, following the slight incline of the terrain. The sewer tunnels began giving way to older construction, hand-laid stone foundation walls and Roman-style arch drainage systems, clearly predating the colonial city. This was the historical layer he was searching for. He found it behind a crumbling brick wall, a vast circular chamber, clearly excavated and reinforced, smelling overwhelmingly of ozone and ancient spices. The Black Stone Tabernacle. It wasn't a church. It was a ritual complex. At the center of the chamber stood a rough altar carved from black obsidian, stained with residue. Above it, etched into the dome, was a massive carving of the serpent and heart, but this time, the serpent was coiled around a stylized silver coin, representing the weakness they sought to eliminate. And there, standing before the altar, was Elias Thorne. The patriarch was taller and broader than Caleb remembered, his form shimmering slightly in the weak light, suggesting he was already closer to the haunt state, more spirit than substance. He was actively pouring a thick black liquid from a clay urn onto a small stone slab placed upon the altar. The slab held the remains of a child. "The fool returns," Elias Thorne's voice rasped, the sound echoing unervingly in the massive space, not mechanical, but saturated with cold malice. "You burned my sons, geologist. But now you are too late. The cycle ends where it began, with the pure sacrifice." Caleb raised the silver compass shield. "The cycle ends here, Thorne. You won't corrupt this city." Elias turned fully. His eyes, tiny points of orange light deep within the tar casing, settled on the compass. "Silver. Such a beautiful, weak metal. You hold the last true vulnerability in this world, young Thorne. Once I merge with Phoebe's preserved soul, no earthly bond will hold me. I will shed the need for this husk and become the pure spirit of the tar. And then," he tilted his head, "I will wear your soul like a garment." As Elias raised his hands to begin the final incantation, the sound of movement filled the massive room. For more eaters descended from the upper walkways and conduits, their clicking sounds amplified by the stone dome. Caleb was surrounded, trapped in the heart of the labyrinth, facing the entire cursed family and the progenitor of the horror. He had enough silver for perhaps 2 of them, but not 5, and certainly not the ethereal Elias. He had to disrupt the ritual, or Port Azmar would become the tomb of every soul within it. Caleb assessed the situation quickly. 4 eaters were closing the circle, 2 on each side, 1 behind, 1 crawling down from the dome above the altar. Elias stood like a living statue, hands still raised over Phoebe's corpse, waiting for the perfect moment to complete the ritual. He couldn't fight them all, but he didn't need to. He needed to destroy Phoebe. If the Thornes didn't have the second heart, they couldn't complete the transformation. They would forever be eaters, dangerous but still vulnerable. Silver could still kill them. Caleb drew his 3 remaining silver darts from his bag. He needed a moment, just 1 moment, to get a clear shot at the altar. "Elias," Caleb shouted, his voice echoing in the tabernacle. "You've waited 200 years for this moment. But you made one mistake." Elias paused. His orange eyes narrowed. "Mistake? You let a geologist find you." Caleb threw the first dart, not at Elias, but at the ceiling, at a point where he'd noticed structural weakness, where ancient sedimentary layers met the city's modern water pipes. The silver dart pierced an old copper pipe. Water erupted like a dragon's breath. The freezing water poured into the tabernacle, not a trickle, but a waterfall. Port Azmar's water system, under centuries of pressure, released its power into the enclosed space. The eaters shrieked, not from pain from the water, but from the interruption. The bitumen coating on their skin began to soften, peel away under the pressure. But more importantly, the water diluted the bitumen on the altar. Elias roared, a sound not from his throat but from his mind, a wave of psychic pressure that nearly brought Caleb to his knees. But he had prepared for this. He wore specialized earplugs, and he had strengthened his mind with 2 years of researching their nature. He wasn't fighting vampires. He was fighting cursed geology. While Elias tried to shield Phoebe from the water flow, Caleb lunged forward. An eater blocked his path, one he recognized as one of the children from Black Ridge, now grown and more feral. Caleb swung the silver compass like a warhammer. The silver metal struck the creature's chest. The effect was even more powerful in the wet environment. Silver and water created an electrochemical reaction, amplifying the energy. The creature's entire ribcage exploded in brilliant blue-white light, vaporizing the bitumen and shattering bone. It collapsed into a pile of wet ash. Caleb reached the altar. Elias stood protecting his daughter, his ethereal form now more solid, more angry. He was no longer cold. He was full of hatred. "You destroyed my sons," Elias roared. "You destroyed my legacy. Now I will grind your soul into." "You never understood," Caleb interrupted, his voice eerily calm. "Science is always stronger than magic. Geology is always stronger than curses." He threw the second silver dart, not at Elias, but at the ceiling again. This time, it pierced an old gas pipe. Methane, gas accumulated in sedimentary layers for thousands of years, burst out. Caleb pulled the emergency lighter from his pocket. "Elias Thorne, you've slept too long. You don't know how the world outside has changed." He flicked the lighter. The flame met methane and exploded, not a massive blast, but a controlled, precise flame, because Caleb had calculated the gas volume and distance perfectly. He had studied geochemistry. He knew how to control underground fire. The flame engulfed the altar. The bitumen on Phoebe's corpse began to melt, but Caleb didn't wait. He threw his last silver dart straight into the dead child's heart. Silver pierced through bitumen, bone, and desiccated tissue. And then something strange happened. Phoebe didn't burn. She glowed. From within her body, a pure silver light began to emanate, not fire, but pure, vital energy. This was what Elias never understood. Phoebe never died. She was a stillborn child, never alive, and therefore never had a soul to be trapped in bitumen. She was an empty vessel, and silver, the metal of life and energy, had filled her with light opposite to darkness. The light exploded outward, spreading through the tabernacle like a shockwave. It didn't burn stone or water, but it crushed every trace of bitumen, of obsidian, of dead matter. The remaining eaters shrieked, their bodies beginning to crumble. They weren't close enough to the haunt state to exist without their bitumen shells. They collapsed into dust, carried away by the flood waters. But Elias didn't collapse. Elias Thorne, the patriarch, was too close to transformation. The silver light didn't destroy him. It only pushed him into the final stage earlier than planned. His bitumen body evaporated completely, leaving behind an ethereal form, a phantom made from pure rage and hatred, no longer bound by matter. "You freed me," Elias whispered, his voice now cold wind. "You fool. Now I don't need silver or sunlight. I am the Blackstone spirit." Caleb felt cold pierce through his coat. He had made a mistake. He didn't prevent the transformation. He had accidentally completed it in a different way. Elias began gliding toward Caleb, his form no longer affected by water or fire. He was a spiritual entity now, a true haunt. But Caleb remembered what he had read in the manuscript. No longer bound by any matter save the silver soul. He understood. Physical silver could no longer touch Elias. But the spirit of silver, pure will, determination, could still. Caleb dropped the darts. He dropped the compass. He just stood there in the knee-deep water, facing the phantom. "Elias Thorne," Caleb said, his voice resonating with new confidence. "You're wrong. You're not the Blackstone spirit. You're just a memory of greed, a fear of death." "Silence," Elias roared, lunging at Caleb. "And memories," Caleb continued, "not moving, can be forgotten." He closed his eyes. He concentrated on every second he had lived through sunlight, every morning he woke up, every breath of fresh air, every moment he felt warmth on his skin. He thought about life, not death. When Elias touched Caleb, his phantom form met something he didn't expect: resistance. Not physical resistance, but existential resistance. Caleb, a living man, warm, full of biological energy, was the complete opposite of what Elias had become. The phantom began to fade. "No," Elias shrieked. "I waited too long. I sacrificed too much. And that," Caleb opened his eyes, "is why you lose. You sacrificed everything to not die. But you forgot that life isn't avoiding death. Life is accepting it. The silver light from Phoebe's corpse, still glowing on the altar, flared up once more. This time, it didn't push Elias away. It pulled him in, into the empty vessel, into Phoebe. Elias screamed, a sound echoing through the tunnels of Port Azmar, heard as a cold wind by thousands of residents above ground. And then he vanished, sucked into his daughter's corpse, trapped forever in a vessel with no exit. The silver light faded. The floodwater began to recede, and Caleb Thorne stood alone in the silent black stone tabernacle, soaking wet, exhausted, but alive. Port Azmar never knew what happened beneath their streets. The local press reported a major water pipe rupture that flooded part of the old sewer system. The abandoned warehouse district was fenced off, declared unsafe, and forgotten. Caleb had climbed out of the tunnels at dawn, carrying Phoebe's body carefully wrapped in his waterproof tarp. She was no longer glowing, but the silver light had left its mark. Her skin now looked peaceful, no longer dark or cursed. He brought her to a small cemetery on the outskirts of Port Azmar, a place he had researched that was managed by a small parish specializing in lost souls. He didn't explain. He just paid cash for a simple grave, no headstone, no name. Bury her in sunlight, he told the old gravedigger. Never in shadow. The man nodded, asking nothing more. He had seen many strange things in his profession. Caleb Thorne didn't return to normal life. He couldn't. But he also didn't continue living as a haunted recluse. Instead, he found a new path. He became a consultant for others who had encountered the unexplainable. He didn't advertise. He had no website. But word of mouth spread, in dark forums and underground communities. People knew if you found something geologically wrong, contact Caleb Thorne. He helped a mining company in Montana understand why their workers were disappearing near an ancient cave system. It turned out to be a parasitic fungus that created hallucinations, causing people to walk deep into caves and never return. He helped a small town in Oregon stop a river monster. Actually, a toxic gas stream from an underground fissure, creating hallucinations of a large creature. And sometimes, very rarely, he found things like the Thorne family. Things that couldn't be fully explained by science. Things that lay at the boundary. The silver compass never left Caleb's wrist. He had it repaired, polished, but the faint black bloodstains remained in the engravings, a reminder. Sometimes, late at night, he sat in his small apartment and held the compass, feeling its weight. He wondered how many other Thorne families were out there, how many ancient hunting systems still waited beneath mountains, beneath cities, in unexplored caves. He knew the answer, but he didn't say it aloud. Some truths were too heavy to share. 5 years after the Port Azmar incident, Caleb received a letter. No return address. Just a seal, the image of a serpent coiled around a pierced heart. His heart sank. He opened the letter with trembling hands. Inside, just one sentence, written in thick black ink. The father's brother sleeps beneath Corbeau Mountain. He hears the echo of silver light. He is waking. No signature. None was needed. Caleb looked out the window of his apartment, at the busy city below. Thousands of people moving about, completely unaware of the things waiting in the darkness beneath. He set the letter down. He stood up. He grabbed his backpack, always prepared, always packed with geological equipment, silver tools, and emergency supplies. He put the silver compass around his neck, and he stepped out the door, into the night, toward Corbeau Mountain. Because some horrors never die. They just wait. And when they wake, someone has to be there to bury them again. Caleb Thorne was that someone. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would never stop fighting. Not until the last coffin was sealed. Not until the last serpent was cut from the last heart. Or until the darkness finally swallowed him whole. 6 months after Caleb Thorne left his apartment heading toward Corbeau Mountain, a young geologist named Sarah Chun found his journal. It was hidden in a safety deposit box, sent to her address by an automated service that triggered if Caleb didn't log in for 6 months. Inside the journal, she read the incredible stories about bitumen coffins, about silver light, about cursed families living in darkness. The last page had just one sentence, written in shaky handwriting. If you are reading this, I have failed. Corbeau Mountain is deeper than I thought. But I left the map. I left the tools. And I left the truth. If you are brave enough, finish what I started. If not, bury this journal. And never, ever, go down into darkness without silver. Saracen looked at the journal for a long time. Then she closed it. She stood up. And she began searching for a silver shop. Because the story doesn't end with one geologist. It continues with everyone who chooses to stand between the light and the shadow. Everyone who understands that some boundaries must be defended, no matter the cost. Everyone who knows that geology isn't just about rocks and earth, but about the ancient horrors buried beneath them, waiting to be discovered, or better yet, left undisturbed. But curiosity is a powerful force, and fear is an even more powerful teacher. Saracen would learn both, just as Caleb Thorne had learned before her. She would descend into Corbeau Mountain. She would find traces of Caleb's final journey. And she would discover that the Thorne family was not unique. They were part of something much larger, much older, a network of darkness that spanned continents and centuries. But that is a story for another time. For now, remember this. If you ever find yourself in a cave where sound doesn't echo, where silence swallows everything, where the air feels thick and ancient, turn back. Don't open any coffins sealed with black pitch. Don't disturb any symbols carved into stone. And most importantly, always carry silver. Not jewelry, not decoration, but real, solid silver that can burn away the darkness. Because the Thorne flesh eaters were just one family. One hunting system in one mountain range. There are others. Sleeping in obsidian labyrinths beneath forgotten mountains, beneath bustling cities, beneath places where humans have long since stopped looking. They sleep in patience, preserved by bitumen and hatred, waiting for the curious, the brave, or the foolish to break their seals. And when they wake, they are hungry. They glide in darkness, their movements silent except for the scrape, skitter of their talons on stone. They don't run. They don't chase. They hunt with patience honed over centuries. They drain their victims completely, leaving behind only dried husks, paper-thin reminders of what once was warm and alive. But they have weaknesses. Sunlight causes them pain. Silver burns them. And most importantly, they need their rituals to complete their transformation. Without the second heart, without the perfect sacrifice, they remain vulnerable. They remain killable. This is what Caleb Thorne learned. This is what he passed on. This is the knowledge that separates survival from becoming another desiccated corpse in an underground hunting system. Saracen would carry this knowledge forward. She would add to it, learn new things, discover new weaknesses in new creatures. And eventually, she too would train someone else, pass the journal on, continue the chain of knowledge that protects humanity from the things that sleep beneath the earth. Because geology is more than science. It's a war fought in darkness, in silence, in the deep places where light has never touched. It's a war fought by people who understand that the boundary between the known and the unknown is not a line in a textbook, but a thin barrier of rock and earth, easily broken, constantly tested by the things that dwell below. And on our side of that barrier stand people like Caleb Thorne and Saracen. Geologists, yes, but also warriors. Scholars, yes, but also hunters. Scientists, yes, but also believers in things that science cannot fully explain. They stand watch. They investigate the anomalies. They seal the breaches. And when necessary, they descend into the darkness, armed with silver and knowledge and courage, to face the ancient horrors and drive them back, bury them again, give humanity another century of ignorant peace. This is their burden. This is their calling. This is why they carry silver compasses and read old manuscripts and listen to folklore that others dismiss. Because they know the truth. The monsters are real. The darkness is patient. And someone has to stand guard. So if you ever meet someone who carries a heavy silver compass, who asks too many questions about local cave systems, who shows unusual interest in old burial sites and forgotten legends, don't dismiss them as eccentric or paranoid. They might be one of the watchers. One of the people who know what really lurks beneath the mountains. One of the people who have seen the thorn flesh-eaters, or things like them, and survived. And if they tell you to stay away from a certain mountain, a certain cave, a certain old mine shaft, listen, because they're not being superstitious or irrational. They're trying to save your life. They're trying to keep you from becoming the next meal for something that should have stayed buried, something that has waited in bitumen-sealed darkness for decades or centuries, something that is finally close to waking. The Thorne family is sealed now, trapped in their coffins beneath collapsed tunnels, or dissolved into silver light, or imprisoned in empty vessels. But their kind exists elsewhere, in other mountains, in other labyrinths, waiting with infinite patience for another Caleb Thorne to make a mistake, to open the wrong coffin, to break the wrong seal. And when that happens, the cycle will begin again. The hunt, the chase, the desperate flight towards sunlight, the discovery of silver's power, the confrontation, the sealing, until the next time. Because some darkness can be defeated but never destroyed. Some evil can be buried but never killed. Some horrors can be fought but never forgotten. This is the truth that Caleb Thorne learned in the Obsidian Labyrinth beneath Black Ridge. This is the truth he carried with him to Port Azmar and beyond. This is the truth written in his journal, waiting for the next person brave enough or foolish enough to continue his work. The Thorn flesh-eaters are not the end of the story. They are just one chapter in a much longer, much darker book. A book written in bitumen and blood, in silver and sacrifice, in the screams of victims and the determination of survivors. A book that is still being written, page by page, as people like Sarah Chun descend into Corbeau Mountain and other mountains and other labyrinths, armed with silver and science and stubborn human courage. Will they succeed? Will they seal all the coffins, cut all the serpents from all the hearts, bring light to all the dark places? Perhaps. Or perhaps they will simply buy humanity more time. Another generation of ignorance. Another century of safety. Another era before the next seal breaks and the next horror emerges. But that is enough. That is the bargain. That is what the Watchers accept when they pick up the silver compass and descend into darkness. They fight not to win forever, but to protect for now. They stand guard not because they can eliminate evil, but because someone must hold the line between civilization and the ancient, hungry things that dwell beneath it. And so the watch continues. In small apartments filled with geological maps and ancient texts. In laboratories where silver is tested and refined. In forgotten libraries where old manuscripts reveal new secrets. In caves and tunnels and labyrinths where the Watchers face the darkness armed with nothing but knowledge, courage, and a piece of polished silver. This is the legacy of Caleb Thorne. This is the burden he passed to Sarah Chun. This is the truth hidden beneath the official explanations of collapsed caves and ruptured water pipes. This is the reality that most people never know, never suspect, never have to face. But some do. Some people open the wrong door, explore the wrong cave, disturb the wrong silence. And when they do, when they come face to face with things that should not exist, with creatures that defy scientific explanation, with horrors preserved in bitumen and animated by hatred, they have a choice. They can deny what they saw, convince themselves it was hallucination or trauma or oxygen deprivation. They can bury the memory and pretend it never happened. They can return to the normal world and try to forget. Or they can accept the truth. Pick up the silver. Read the journals. Learn the symbols. Join the watch. Most choose to forget. But a very few, choose to fight. And those few make all the difference. They are why humanity sleeps safely, unaware of the things that scrape and skitter in the deep places. They are why the ancient hunting systems remain sealed, why the bitumen coffins stay closed, why the serpents do not coil around any more hearts. They are the Watchers, the geologists who understand that their science touches something older and darker than rock and mineral. The scholars who know that some legends are warnings, not entertainment. The warriors who descend into labyrinths armed with silver and determination. They are people like Caleb Thorne, like Sarah Chun, like others whose names are known only in whispered conversations and encoded messages. And somewhere, right now, One of them is descending into darkness, following seismic anomalies, tracking microtremors, investigating sinkholes that smell of tar and death, carrying silver and hope and the accumulated knowledge of everyone who came before. Will they succeed? Will they survive? Will they seal the breach and return to the light? We won't know until 6 months after they don't log in, when their journal arrives at someone else's address, with new information, new warnings, new instructions for the next person brave enough or foolish enough to continue the watch. And so it goes, generation after generation, watcher after watcher, silver after silver. The Thorne flesh-eaters sleep again, for now. But others are waking. Others are listening. Others are hungry. And the watchers stand ready. Always carry silver. Never disturb the seals. And if you hear scraping in the darkness, the soft skitter of talons on stone, don't wait to investigate. Don't try to document it. Don't seek to understand it. Just run. Run toward sunlight. Run toward open air. Run toward the world above where people live in ignorant safety, protected by watchers they will never know, fighting horrors they will never believe. Run, and be grateful that someone else will descend to face what you escaped. Someone with silver and courage and the knowledge passed down through journals and whispers and the bitter experience of survivors. Run, and remember, the darkness beneath the earth is patient. The horrors preserved in bitumen are eternal. The hunting systems built over centuries still function. But so does the watch. So do the watchers. So does the simple, powerful truth that silver burns the darkness, that knowledge defeats ignorance, that courage stands against horror. This is the story of the Thorne flesh-eaters. This is the story of Caleb Thorne and Sarah Chun and all the unnamed watchers who came before and will come after. This is the story written in the boundary between geology and mythology, between science and superstition, between the known world and the ancient darkness that sleeps beneath it. And this story doesn't end. It continues. Right now, beneath some mountain, some city, some forgotten cave. A watcher descends, silver in hand, journal in pack, courage in heart, and the darkness waits, always waiting, always hungry, always patient, but never, ever unopposed.